All right, I'm going to start it. Oh my goodness. All right, this is so exciting. So we just got done with an awesome rehearsal with the combined guitar forces of Tucson, Phoenix, and GCC. So it was wonderful. We rehearsed Bill's large ensemble piece. We rehearsed Gabriel's large ensemble piece. Alicia's piece is coming too. And it's going to be wonderful next weekend. This is a very special concert that I can't say enough about how kind of exciting it is that we'll have 3 different instrument choirs all in the same concert, all playing really new music, all with extremely strong ensemble leaders and wonderful composers and all of that. This is a rare treat. Also in a beautiful space at St. Matthew's in Chandler. And these 3 composers were kind enough to sit down and they agreed to just sort of share about their music and their writing and that kind of thing. And I just had a couple simple questions prepared. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and anything else you guys are thinking. So this is Bill White over here, who we met at the festival last year, the Oh My Years Festival. This is Alicia, friend and fellow student and colleague. And this is Gabriel, who I got to know through composition at ASU. And so I'd like to start off just by asking you guys, maybe start with the second question that I was mentioning, which is, it's rare to hear non-traditional new music for a large guitar ensemble. At least I feel that way in the Southwest. And so I was wondering if that was on your guys' mind as you were writing, and we'll count guitar quartet as for a large guitar ensemble. Was that on your mind as you were writing? Did you respond to any thoughts that you had about that? Or did you just go for it and just dive right in? So I don't know if whoever wants to start, go for it.
That's a good question. Well, I mean, for me as a guitarist, with the large ensemble piece that I did, yeah, I think I was thinking more along the lines of how can I make this clearly something for a group of guitars rather than a piece with 4 guitar parts or 3 guitar parts that's just blown up into, you know. So I was thinking very much in terms of what is the overall structure of the sound with the ensemble and how can I play with that, how can I augment that with the electric guitars being added in. Just as far as instrumentation, I think that was my main leading thought, was, you know, differentiating it. Because I think that's a common thing, right? Is with guitar ensembles just in general. We don't tend to look for guitar ensemble music. Like, let's play Cuban Landscape with Rain by Brouwer. It's a quartet. It works for ensemble, it's pretty cool, but it's still a quartet piece. You know? So yeah, I think I was trying to go in a different direction a little bit.
Excellent. That's a really good point.
I think like when you're a guitarist, you spend so much time playing, or you have at some point playing the traditional repertoire, that for me, when I was like approaching writing the piece, I was like, what like gestures or techniques do we not do so much, and or like when we do them, are they like sometimes considered a mistake and like the traditional sense, and like can I take some of those techniques and gestures and just like run with them or build a whole piece around it. So that was my approach to like what can I take those like different sounds and different techniques to build a piece around them that like I ended up building mine's around a glissando, which there aren't many pieces based around the glissando, at least in the guitar side of things. So I wanted to just like take it around with it and explore it. So that's sort of my approach to it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it's a really easy technique to do, but you don't see it a whole lot. That's true. Yeah, excellent.
I guess I didn't even think about like existing guitar repertoire because I mean, I grew up playing guitar, but I'm definitely not a performer on the same level as you guys or the rest of the people here that we're rehearsing today. So I've never played in like a guitar ensemble, never really been exposed to the repertoire. But when you first approached me about this, I think you mentioned there would be up to, I think at the time you said 20, up to 20 guitarists. And so my immediate thought, and actually it turns out there are 30, right?
Yeah.
So my immediate thought was, you know, what can you do with a huge number of a homogeneous sounding instrument? Because 20 acoustic guitars is a really interesting consistency in the timbre.
Mm.
And then I immediately got to thinking about like having them surrounding the audience, and that raised a bunch of compositional problems that ultimately like guided the direction of the piece. So the premise was really like 20, 30 guitarists completely surrounding, enveloping the audience.
And the rest of the piece grew from that.
Grew from that.
Yeah, that is true. I always thought of it as a really interesting compositional puzzle to have a choir of homogeneous sounding instruments.
Yeah.
That how are you going to build like a dialogue between different timbres, and how are you going to exploit it so that it's not all just like a big wash of the same color for the entire piece, you know? What are you gonna do with register? What are you gonna do with different techniques? And that kind of thing, and it was always kind of an exciting thing to think about as a composer. So I'm looking forward to hearing a whole concert of it and seeing what all these other composers have done as well. That's really great. And another thing too that that makes me think of is going along with the thought of many guitars together, is that perhaps with a guitar ensemble, especially a community guitar ensemble or something kind of local guitar ensemble, you'll get a full range of skill, right? Like you might have people like we had players here who play at the highest professional level and you know who won big competitions and that kind of thing, and then you have people who just really love guitar and they just want to join a guitar class at their community college and that sort of thing. So how did you guys approach that, those different levels of different levels of ability with guitars?
Yeah, well, my first movement is rather simple on the page, right? I mean, I kind of tried to pare down the actual technical difficulty of it, and as just kind of thinking about how the piece was composed, there's, you know, just how can I make a complex sound without necessarily having technical complexity? And this is a little bit of a digression, but I do feel like there's a thing in the greater composition world where if a piece isn't technically difficult, it's sometimes not thought of as worth. You know, I've heard, I mean, one thing off the top of my head, this is completely not a guitar thing, but the viola piece Shahagir by Alan Gavanis, I've heard several times throughout just different schools, oh, that piece is great, but it's easy. Like, why is there a but it's easy?
Right.
You know, so I took this as a pretty good opportunity to purposefully write music that isn't technically demanding, and on the page is pretty sparse, but is contributing to a greater overall texture that is itself complex. If that makes sense.
That's really great.
Yeah, I think I was thinking along the same direction, because I knew there was going to be, since I've played in different like guitar ensembles, because there's always such a wide range in skill and levels and everything. My idea was to just pick a handful of gestures and just start restricted and just see like how far I can take those really simple gestures. So on the page it's really simple, but I think also paring it down to just like a quartet will make it a little bit more like intimate, and I think it'll be interesting to like put some distance from the audience in that way, of like having really large guitar ensemble sound and then having a really just like very, very intimate, very small, simple gestures. Like glissando can be, you know, just by itself, just a very small gesture. And of course, like on a guitar, it decays so fast. So just having these very like simple gestures, but when they're, you know, combined, they can, like between the quartet members, can have a bigger impact. So that was kind of my way of approaching it, was like start simpler, choose like just a limited amount of gestures and go from there.
That's great. Yeah, and the shape of the program will start big and then get really intimate and then open up really huge again towards the end. So I think hopefully that'll be a nice ride for the audience, is that they'll get that full spectrum, you know, and the variety will increase and their enjoyment. That's really great. Thank you.
So when you told me that there would be up to 20 guitarists, it became very clear that the varying skill levels have to be accounted for. And so in my piece, there are literally like divergent options that people can play, and sometimes it's just one note, very timid, and everyone just sort of like the music just wilts and everything just falls apart. So I wanted to have the option that everyone could play confidently and comfortably to really achieve the sort of massive sound that I was going for. So there are some options, if you choose a path through the piece, you could potentially play things really, really simply, like that a beginner player could pull off. And then if you wanted to, you could go all out and do pretty complex virtuosic things, and anything in between.
That's beautiful. And when they left here, I gotta say, when those guitarists left here, I remember rehearsing in ensembles in undergrad, and some days were good and some were kind of rough, but they were in good spirits when they left. So I feel like these pieces were pretty well designed, and they seemed like they were into it, and the ensemble leaders were as well. And we all couldn't be more thankful of their willingness to venture out with us and work on this project. I guess maybe one last question for you guys is there anything special with this piece about how you approached it? How did you come up with anything else that you can share about the aesthetic of it, or the main thrust of the ideas that you wanted to communicate in this piece? I'd love to hear it.
So I think the two big ideas that I was using are kind of drawn from actually the new complexity composers. Particularly, I've been looking at like Michael Finnessy and Marc-Andre a lot. But this kind of concept of things as events rather than necessarily a horizontal or vertical musical structure, right? You kind of pull these things apart, and it's very dense and busy, but it's just this event. Here it is, right? And the other thing, especially from Finnessy in his history of photography and sound, is this real stretching and distorting of existing musical ideas, right? So there's all these disparate bits of, like American Great Songbook or slave tunes, things like that being interweaved and distorted and stretched apart. So those were the main ideas. And then I wrote the second movement first, which is the much more stripped down, just the quartet, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to write my own material that then is stretched and distorted rather than taking something that's already out there. So that's why the second movement is very just straightforward, so that everything that you're hearing in the first movement is that material, but stretched to the kind of almost maximum, right? The first minute of it is just this kind of undulation between A and B, which are the first intervals of the melody.
Oh yeah.
So you're just hearing that stretched and played with through the volume swells and rhythmically and all that. And then it goes through that development, and then it suddenly is focused into the quartet for the second movement.
When I listen to your piece too, it's like you said, there's a lot of ways that you could say that your piece is complex acoustically and with amongst all the parts and that kind of thing. But at the same time, the end result feels quite simple. Like you're not trying to challenge us and keeping track of 5 individual voices, like a really complex fugue or something like that. It's really about hearing the events as one unit.
Exactly.
And it reminded me of a quote that I heard from Elliot Carter one time, who's I guess adjacent to the new complexity maybe. And he said, if you look at a tree is really complex, but it's really just, we perceive it as a tree. And that's kind of how he was saying that he wanted his music to be perceived, that he wasn't trying to be complex for complexity's sake.
Right, exactly.
But, the perception of the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. Cool. Alicia?
Yeah, so my piece it's called Surface and Sky, and I usually am always starting with some sort of narrative ideas, a starting point, before even thinking about sound or music or anything. So it's just kind of inspired by just basically like the area between two different things, whether it's 2 points of like a start and a finish line, and what that area in between encompasses. So then I was thinking about also gestures that might encompass, like that has a clear start and finish, and so that's where I got thinking about like the idea of just the glissando of like start and a finish line, but like it's always focused on those 2 points, but never the area in between. So then I got to thinking about just like the idea of like verticality with range and playing with maximizing it and like pairing it all the way down, and just really playing around with like everything that's in between like a pair of two notes, something really simple. So the piece starts with like these really large glissandos that decay really quickly, and then eventually it grows in activity as like the range is pared down. Even though like on guitar, you know, it happens horizontally. It's kind of a weird thing, right? It happens horizontally, but the range, I was thinking in terms of verticality, but it eventually pairs down and like increases in activity. And so it's kind of like filling in the gap between, you know, point A and point B. So I was just kind of inspired by like, you know, I guess that area in between like two drastically different things, like, and then that's how I got the title. I was just thinking of like, you know, surface and sky, as far as like something that's very vertical, and, like, you know, range and pairing that with music. So that kind of drove the piece, and you know, it all came together from there. So.
Lovely. That's an intriguing idea, almost like something from physics or chemistry. The closer you bring two reactive things together, the more action happens. That's a wonderful idea for music.
I almost get, I mean, I haven't heard your piece, but I get the impression of like pressurizing something, you're compressing it, and then like the energy builds or something like that.
So cool. So cool.
So, yeah, for my piece, as I mentioned, the initial idea was having the guitarist around the audience. And then from that grew like a few other sort of constraints, I guess, in the compositional process. One was, of course, the different levels. And so basically I wanted the players to not have to coordinate too much with each other and count or have anything that's too rhythmically complex. And to have the option to play either highly complex or very simple things. And then the other sort of problem that created was then how do you coordinate these people? Like, you know, you can just let it go freely, but there's always a risk of things falling apart. And so I decided to make a video that's essentially like a conductor, and everyone hits play on the video at the same time, and they have it on their phones. And then it tells them when to play, and for how long, and how loud, and how intense, and things like that. And so then with that, there's a lot of less, I guess, margin there. And that allowed me to free up the actual material that they were playing a little bit. And then in terms of the actual like musical material, I've always been very interested in the guitar's like almost bell-like abilities, like playing natural harmonics. You know, it sounds literally like a bell that decays. And so I wanted to create the sensation of like the audience being surrounded by thousands of little tiny bells and things like that. So a lot of the textures and the harmonies were just derived from things that might sound bell-like. And to achieve that, for the, you know, the music nerds, I think we all qualify. Basically, the right side of the room is based on harmonies, like on an overtone series of the low E string of the guitar. And then on the left, it's overtone series of an F 3/4 sharp. So a bit of a large like whole set. And then when these two interact, and they have a common pitch, which is the high E. So those two overtone series have one common note that is the opening of the piece. And so from that, these two things emerge. And then gradually, they just go down the overtone series. And then about halfway through the piece, then the two fundamentals switched. I forgot what they are, like a B quarter flat and a G sharp or something like that. And that's it. Really, they're like basically 4 harmonies in the piece. And you're just going up and down the overtone series. And then a few wacky little extended techniques and things like that.
Beautiful.
Just for good measure.
Well, what a treasure we have in these composers, all local, all from the Southwest, in one of the hubs for classical guitar, the Southwest. So it's really going to be a beautiful show. We hope that a lot of folks come out. We'll surround you with guitars. We'll surround you with swells from electric guitars. We'll surround you with ethereal bell-like sounds, like you're taking a bubble bath, and you submerge your head and you just hear the bubbles popping all around in 360 degrees. It's quite a sonic experience. To say nothing of the wonderful flute choirs and low clarinet choir that we have as well joining us. So thanks, guys. What interesting people you are, and what a cool opportunity to hear a little bit about your thought process, which is always fascinating. There's so many interesting people in the field of new music. So really, really great. I guess that having been said, we'll stop it there.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, guys. Awesome. Woo. All right. And